Hey guys, today's viewer's email has come in from Thomas. The subject was my Thailand warning to others. So let's get into it. Hi John, I've been watching the videos on your channel and it's amazing how some of the stories so closely resemble what happened to me. I'm sending in this story as I know if I'd seen these stories before I did what I did, I could have made better choices and better decisions about my retirement in Thailand. No doubt I'll be judged as just another Farang who bit off more than he could chew in Thailand, but I do know that there will be some people watching this who may be close to making a decision that could be life-changing for them. If I can give them a heads up and a warning, then it will be worth it for me. So thanks for sharing this, John, and keep up with the channel. You're doing amazing work highlighting what can go wrong for many people and acting as a warning to those who need it. I come from the UK. Like many of the people in the UK over the past 10 years, I was looking forward to retirement. After getting divorced at the age of 50 and working until the age of 55, it quickly became apparent that retiring in the UK was a long way away. I guess I'd have needed to work until I was 65 if I wanted to retire in England, and that just seemed too far and too long to wait. I wanted to enjoy myself, at least a little bit, when I had some kind of health still available to me. My UK divorce cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds. At least I got 3 great children out of it, who to this day are there for me, and me for them. Divorce in the UK is so very one-sided, and I've told my eldest son to be careful if he gets involved with somebody seriously. You could give a lifetime of work away in an instant that she can choose. But here's me giving advice to my son when I do silly things as well. A good friend of mine spent winters in Thailand, 3 months every single year for the past 10 years, and he swore by Thailand and said he would retire there one day when he had enough money to do so. And at the end of 2019, he went for another trip, and I decided to join him. I was a free agent at this time, and I was going to see if I could like Thailand as a place to live out my latter years in retirement. The first month in Thailand was amazing. I spent a lot of time in Bangkok and Pattaya, and I came to the conclusion that this place was definitely somewhere I would like to live. Now, we all know what happened next over the following months, and it looked like Thailand would lock down at some point. We were due to fly back in March, and my mate did just that, returning to England, expecting to visit the following winter. Something about it told me that I should stay. Things were looking very precarious globally, and having just quit my job, looking for a place to retire, I took a gamble and decided to stay in Thailand. A few months later, the country was locked down, and it was difficult to enter Thailand and remain that way for a long time. Being in Thailand during the COVID days, as somebody who'd never really experienced Thailand during normal times, can honestly say was not the best decision. Although I had an amazing time, loving everything about my new life, I had no idea what it was going to be like when the lockdown ended. I had visions of Thailand being slightly different because this was based on my time in the country when no one could visit, and I had no idea what it was going to be like when so many people descended on the country, and all the places that I went to and visited and had a good time at suddenly become heaving with people. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. I rented a condo in Pattaya and got myself a retirement visa, 800,000 baht in the bank, and that was very easy to sort out. The immigration queues were so small when I did the visa, it made me wonder what all the people used to complain about how difficult immigration in Thailand was. It seemed to be a walk in the park for me, but again, that was because I did it during COVID. I'd been in Thailand about 6 months when I decided that I definitely made the right decision. My retirement funds were more than adequate to provide me about £2,000 a month in income, more than enough to live a good life in Thailand. I then met someone, a 32-year-old Thai lady that I had an immediate connection with. She was struggling to get by at the time. She said she worked in the bars and wasn't very busy at this time as it had been before. But she had to stay in Pattaya because she desperately needed to be able to send money home for her 2 children, who are currently under the care of her parents. I fell hard for this girl. She had the sweetest of smiles and seemed so innocent, yet deep down I knew this was an impossibility. Perhaps it was due to COVID and the lack of opportunities to meet other people or go out of their way to normally meet someone like you could. But we got very close very quickly, and after being together for only 3 months, I made the fateful decision to ask her to marry me. She was over the moon and agreed, of course, and I found myself getting all the documentation I needed so that we could marry, which we did when it was possible a few weeks later. Things hadn't yet got too bad when certain places were closed, so we managed to get this sorted out quite easily. We reasoned with each other that as soon as we were able to travel to her village and meet her family and do the ceremony properly, we would. But we only wanted to do this when we were able to. A window opened when it was possible to travel a few months later, and we went up and did the ceremony. And the family now knew who I was. When we were due to leave back to Pattaya, I had a desire to stay in the area. It was a lot closer, resembling to where I came from in England. I was someone who loved the countryside, and this village on the outskirts of Khon Kaen seemed like the best place I'd ever been. Yes, lots of the houses you saw around the area were very primitive. It was more difficult to buy certain items, but it wasn't a busy, bustling city. It was quiet and peaceful and seemed like the most perfect location to retire. I thought about renting a house with a pool and just having the best place to live for an affordable price. I told my now wife how much I liked the place and asked her if we could look around for houses to rent in the area. She told me that renting a house in a village such as this is not really possible. We would have to rent in the big town if we wanted to live here. That made sense. Looking around the village, as I mentioned previously, the houses seemed very primitive, and the houses that looked good were lived in by the people that owned them. There was no possibility to rent somewhere. We decided to go to Khon Kaen City and spend a few days there, but it wasn't the vibe I was looking for. Although we did look at some houses that were available to rent, that were far cheaper than we could rent down in Pattaya. I just didn't really like the city. Well, not a bad idea while it lasted, I thought, and we made our way back down to Pattaya, where we got back into the swing of normal life, or as normal as you'd expect during that difficult time. I kept thinking about village life and doing something different, and we often talked together about living there. Then, one day, when I was bemoaning the lack of possibility to rent somewhere there, she said most people build houses if they want to go and live there. They don't have any rent to pay, and they have their own house, that they can do it their own way. What did I think of this idea? Now, looking back, I wonder why she didn't bring this up originally when I was thinking about it to start with. But I think her idea was to let the idea build inside me and the idea to live in the village become something that I yearned for, before she raised this as a possibility. I have no idea what went on in terms of the houses being built there and things of that nature whatsoever, as I was not someone who followed Thailand-related news and content on the internet. I just went to visit with my mate, looking for a place to retire early, and found myself in Thailand. It was not like I knew anything about Thailand beforehand, and I want to say that because many people will think, why didn't you know? But I just didn't know. This idea intrigued me. We could have our own house on our own land in a beautiful village setting in rural Thailand. Sign me up was what I thought about initially. But without jumping the gun, I told her we needed to go back for another visit and look into how much it was going to cost to build somewhere. It was still very difficult to travel, the travel ban being imposed and then lifted. But when it was lifted for the next time, we did just that. We headed back up to Khon Kaen, and we met with house builders in the city. And I learned for about £100,000 I could have the type of house that in England would cost 5 times that. I was aware that as a foreigner I wasn't able to own the land, but I saw no issues with it belonging to my wife. We found a piece of land in the village that was for sale. It was 1 rai in size, which for anyone struggling with the conversion is 1,600 square meters. We got the land for a good price, and it was transferred to my wife's name. She seemed to be ever so happy that we were building a house in her village, and I was happy as well. I then took on a company to build a house for me, and it was built over the next 6 months, in a way that you'd expect. There were not really any issues in terms of the build, and when it was complete, I stood in awe at how amazing it looked, and spent a bit of money furnishing the place to a Western standard, and we moved in. I'd spent a big chunk of my retirement savings on this house, but I reasoned with myself that I would never need to spend money on rent again. So, although my income had dropped from around £2,000 a month to £1,700 a month, I was happy with this. The first few months in the house was everything I expected it to be. We had a balcony on our upstairs bedroom which overlooked the rice fields. We had an area in the corner of the land where I made a barbecue with an undercover shade area where I'd have a couple of beers and grill steaks on the barbecue. Everything I wanted my retirement to be. But this is when the first problem arose. After a few months, my wife came to me and said she wanted her 2 children to move in with us. While I could understand this from her point, this was not something that I wanted in retirement. The youngest was only 8, so that could be in theory 10 years more before she was due to move out. And I didn't fancy the idea of having a child around all the time. I raised my concerns with my wife, but I wanted to be reasonable as well. So I said they can spend some time here and some time with their grandparents, where they still stay. I thought this was a great compromise, but my wife was upset by this. Apparently, she said it was her understanding that they were going to move in with us at some point, although she never mentioned this earlier on. Needless to say that they did move in. We were lucky in the sense that we had enough bedrooms, but things just didn't feel the same when they did move in. It wasn't something I wanted at all, and I really resented my wife for allowing this to happen, or for not mentioning this beforehand. But I got used to it pretty quickly, and just accepted this as part of my life. My wife at the end of the day was still my wife, and she never did anything other than this to upset me. That is, until she said we needed a car where we lived. I suppose we did, but I was okay any time we needed to go somewhere, just hopping on the bus and going into town. I found it quite fun. But in her mind, we had a nice house, and without a car, that's not right. I sort of understood what she was saying, so I bought a car, and my income dropped even more after this, but not by much, and at least my wife would be happy. I bought the car in her name as well. Yes, I know I should not have done that. At the time, I didn't know differently. I thought foreigners weren't able to own cars. My mistake. A few months went by, and I was loving my life in the village, loving the house, and I didn't regret doing what I did, even though her children were living there. The next thing she did, though, made things far worse. One morning, I woke up to find a load of monks chanting in the living room downstairs. She never forewarned me about this, and I went down to look what was going on. My wife looked at me and said it's for good luck. We need to bless the house, and we hadn't done it yet, and this was the only time that they were able to do this because of the COVID issue. I didn't think much of it at first, but when it was over, my wife came to me and said her parents' house is currently in a bad state, which is why the monks needed to come to bless the house, so her parents could move in. They wouldn't move in without this. I looked at her and asked if she was joking. Her parents, although nice, friendly people, had a few habits that didn't quite align with my own. I'd like to stress, though, that they were nice people, but they were ever so loud and behaved in a way that I thought of living them would be a nightmare. I had to speak to my wife that I wasn't happy with this. Her children was one thing, but to her parents, no way. I am not happy for her parents to move in, and please make them aware of that. She looked at me very strangely, not understanding what I was saying, or not understanding why I was saying what I was saying. One way or the other, she fully expected me to be on board with the idea. I have no idea why. I explained to her that I built a house to live out my retirement in peace and quiet, in an idyllic location, with my wife. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to build a house for her family members to live in, because I wouldn't be able to do the same things as I would if it was just the two of us. I was already compromised on my ability to walk around the house in just my underwear, thanks to her children moving in, and now with our parents moving in, there will be other restrictions will be placed on me than that was meant to be our house that we own together. No matter what I said though, she wasn't having any of it, and they moved in. I could do nothing about it, because it was her house at the end of the day, and I had no say in it. My wife was still happy, and she still brought me breakfast in bed, still made me coffee during the day, and still doted on me. But I'd be woken up at 6 in the morning with very loud Thai television blaring in the background. I'd walk around the house and trip up on a child's toy, and I'd go to the fridge and get food that I put there, only to find that it's already been eaten. My beer supply was drunk, and it just wasn't as happy as I was expecting to be. I had everything I wanted right here, but more on top as well that I didn't want, and this was causing me no end of stress and heartache. Her parents had been living with us for about a month, when I sat my wife down and told her that they had to move out. I wasn't prepared for them to live here anymore. I'm struggling mentally to accept this, especially since they have their own house down the road. They lived in houses like this their whole lives, so what's wrong with them living in it now? My wife just couldn't see the same way as me, and we had the biggest argument we ever had. When it cooled off, I went to her again and said, how about if I fix their house for them? If I fix their house for them, they can go back to live in their own house, and your children can spend half the time at that house and half the time with us. How does that sound for you? The first thing she said was, you'll pay to fix their house? Yes, I will, I said. Sit them down and ask them if they would be happy to move there. So, their house was fixed. Probably £20,000 I put into that, and it wasn't all that bad. It was now made of concrete as opposed to wood. It had no holes in it. It had separate bedrooms and a nice separate bathroom. In essence, a brand new house was built for this amount of money for them. Guess what happened next? Her parents didn't proceed to move into that house. No, another family member moved in. I think it was her uncle that decided to move into this house, and I'm thinking that her parents had no intention to move out of our house. And I'm actually thinking that the translation that my wife gave to her parents was not what I was saying to them. I didn't understand the language, and she could basically say anything she wanted and say what I said. So perhaps they thought I was building this house so that her uncle could move in, because he didn't have a house. I was at the end of my ropes by this point. Arguments with my wife over what was happening, and another reduction in income. Thanks to spending £20,000, I was now down to £1,500 a month in income. Still reasonable, especially for the area we were living in, but not quite the £2,000 that it had begun with. I knew I needed to cease spending any more than the income, so it wouldn't change. I lasted another 2 months in the house. It was just becoming too much. My dream of retirement in an idyllic, rural Thailand setting had become the thing of nightmares, and it's all thanks to her family for moving in. She saw nothing wrong with this, and I think that's what made it so hard. She couldn't understand why I didn't want people living in my house that I built. I don't know, but after 2 months, I went with my wife back down to Pattaya to get away, and I thought perhaps I should just move back down here. I talked to my wife about this. I need to point out that apart from the issues with her family, me and my wife got along together perfectly, and still do, but I told her that I couldn't live there anymore. I built this house, and then spent money on a second house, and I needed my own space. I think it finally clicked with her that I wasn't happy with the situation up in the village. She just couldn't see it before. But when she saw me considering moving back to Pattaya, she actually understood just how difficult it was for me. But what would she do? She couldn't kick her parents out, and I still couldn't quite know 100% if she was honest with me about the house that her uncle ended up living in, that was meant to be for her parents. Perhaps it was all just a big misunderstanding, and I wasn't up on the knowledge of how things work in Thailand. We've been living in Pattaya ever since, in a small rented condo. She's still living with me, and we do go and visit the house occasionally. My bedroom in the house is never disturbed, so at least that's one thing, but the condition of the house is deteriorating rapidly. But I just don't like the idea of spending money on it. I cling to the hope that one day we will be able to move there again and have just the two of us living there, and my wife has promised me that she understands now and she was sorry for what happened. But I'm still rather bitter about the whole situation, as you would expect. My dream retirement has seen me with 75% of the income that I should have, not living in the house that I built in order to be able to save money on rent. But at the end of the day, at least I'm where I want to be, and at least my wife understands everything about me. And apart from the house issue, it's not that anything else negative has happened. I really hope this will serve as a warning to many people considering building a house in rural Thailand. You can have an ideal house. Your dream house is going to cost you far less than it would where you came from, but having an entire Thai family moving in is going to put you off. And the thing that is the most difficult to deal with is that your Thai spouse will not understand how you feel about things. She will think that you're being strange. I don't think she was deliberately trying to scam me out of a house for her family. She just thought it was normal for them to move in. And for me, it wasn't. So take this as a lesson to anyone wanting to get involved. Get yourself a lease in place if you can. Build a house that's not too close to where they came from, because the chances are they won't want to live a long way away from where they originally came from. And set the ground rules before you build. Of course, she could go against these, but if there are ground rules in place, at least she knows your intentions beforehand. I'm still happily retired in Thailand, but what a nightmare of a few years that was. A big loss of money, and a worse existence now because of it. So be very careful, guys. Thanks, Thomas.